Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day we explore how technology is transforming our life, work, entire industries, and even world. And I am conscious the world of technology has been getting a bad rap recently and is often blamed for dividing communities rather than uniting them. And as regular listeners will know, I always say on this podcast that technology works best when it brings people together. So where have we gone wrong? And on top of that, there are many legal issues surrounding things like smart cities and autonomous vehicles. So in a nutshell, when I hear things like drone deliveries and self-driving cars, I jump to, wow, that's cool. But what we don't see is all those legal teams scattered all over the world stressing about the implications of these new creations. And for many years, Silicon Valley has proudly moved fast and broke things. That was the mantra. But today, I want to explore the implications of those actions and so much more. So I've invited Victor and Michael from Dentons onto the podcast to explore some of these sensitive topics and some of the exciting aspects of technology and legal tech too. We've got a lot to get through today, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to the US so we can speak with both Michael and Victor from Dentons. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Good day. Hi, this is Victor Boyajian. So I'm the global head of Dentons Venture Technology Group. And what we do is spend a significant amount of time, if not all of our time, on things, innovation, from two guys and gals in a garage, all the way up to, representing big techs and big emerging growth companies that may not be as branded. So again, for us, it's all about innovation. And again, trying to capture the big ideas and growing it.
And I'm Michael Drobac. Thanks for having us. I work in the policy practice, and my focus has been on emerging technologies and truly about things that are changing the way consumers live and the infusion of technology there. And I differentiate a little bit the internet and technology world, because I think there's a conflation of that because my clients have historically been, and my history was working within internet companies. And we had very different issues than, for example, telecommunications companies, as well as some of the device manufacturers or the technology manufacturers. And so I think the conversation is rich because you have a number of different positions in the technology world. And my background is in government relations and having worked with a number of different lawmakers, as well as within the internet companies and technology companies. And I'm now consulting for them. So it's an exciting time.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to both of you for joining me on the podcast today, because it does feel like we're living in a digital age of binary thinking in this polarized society that we find ourselves at the moment, where nobody seems to be able to see the other person's point of view. But as we all know, life is not black or white like that, and most things in life happen in that grey area in between. So I want to try and tackle the topic without mentioning politics or alienating listeners of the left or the right. It's a tricky subject, but with all that in mind, what role do you think tech and social media played in getting us to where we find ourselves right now?
So, Neil, great question. You know, it's interesting. I was, before the pandemic lockdown, I was sitting with a good friend of mine who runs a tech company in San Francisco. And so sitting at the Battery over lunch or a drink, and he looked me in the eye and he said, he's a moderate Democrat, I'm a moderate Republican, that our world is very small, and it felt like it was growing smaller. And this was before the run up to the elections. So that's sort of my context. In terms of what got us here in part, I mean, this is not a burden exclusively on tech and social media, but I will say this, just given the rapid flow of information, the large volumes of information flowing, it's hard to take a step back and sort the data that's coming across. It's hard for people to engage in meaningful dialogues, forget about politics, just because everything is so 24/7. Again, I actually even urge our youngest lawyers that before they are communicating with clients to pause and not send out the one-line email, one-line text, one-line communication, because it fails to capture nuance. And as we all know, nuance and context matters. And again, for me, and I'll flip it over to Michael, but and I'll have some additional thoughts, but that's sort of where we're coming from. How do you manage tons of information, unsorted information, in some cases misinformation, real time?
Yeah, so I like what Victor's saying. I think it's appropriate and targeted. I think what we're finding is that the hysteria about the polarization that the internet and that social media or other platforms are creating, I think is actually hysteria. I think there is a false premise here that somehow people weren't divided in camps. I think there has been a kind of an ability to find communities that was not available to us in the past, but these quote unquote filter bubbles where people are combining with the others that share their view and unable to see through or outside of their community. It's by the very nature of it, we are more connected and therefore we're closer to each other. When I say that, I mean to people who may share our views. But I tend to take a view that the concept that this digital world is, dividing us and having us broker in misinformation. I think it's easy to blame technology and say that it is kind of enhancing the divisions and our binary approach to the world or the polarization. I think that's a cop-out. I think that technology isn't what's to blame for how we act or how we engage. It can be a wonderful distraction from addressing what holes and what issues we haven't addressed in law, what issues we haven't addressed in society, and certainly this can exacerbate or speed up some of the issues that exist in society. But I don't think it's the root cause.
Great points there from both of you. And over here in Europe, when the President of the United States was effectively silenced by a tech company, it did raise a few eyebrows. Yes, there were arguments for and against, but I'm curious, from US citizens that are in the legal profession, what did you think happened here? And what were your thoughts on that?
So I'll offer a personal view. Words matter, right? And people need to be sensitive to context. And if you're sitting on the podium with the largest megaphone on the planet, you have a particular responsibility and burden to be careful of words you're articulating. And I think you have also a responsibility to make sure you're speaking to all of your constituents and not just a core base or part of that community, no matter who you are, beyond the prior administration, current administration, or whomever. So again, it goes back to what I said earlier. Words matter, understanding that 140 or 280 words and characters cannot convey thoughts, and that sometimes they can be wildly misconstrued, especially if you're, forwarding tweets and you're forwarding, news clips without context. So again, people need to just take it down a notch and just be careful. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Michael said, that, technology is really a tool and a channel for communication, and the burden does fall on individuals to act responsibly. And I'm not just focusing on former leaders. I'm talking about all of us as citizens.
And Neil, I think it's a great question, and I think what Victor is saying is is right, which is that we have to be conscious as citizens of what we are putting in public domains. I would say, not focusing on any one company, there is a phenomenon that now has taken hold, which is we are going to deplatform people, companies, programs. There's a host of private sector engagement on what is or is not appropriate, or what is or is not legal. And this is where I begin to say the technology itself isn't the problem, and therefore a device manufacturer, an internet platform, any number of different technology providers making decisions for me as a citizen is troubling. Because the one problem I see, and this is, and it doesn't know a party, it doesn't know a person, but the problem I see is that this speaks to this idea that we're being, forced into our communities, and then someone's making a determination about how I'm going to engage with certain platforms or with my device and what is available to me. And we're seeing this in terms of content moderation. The irony about the circumstances that you speak of and other ones that are similar to it is that all of the moral righteousness that took place after much of the damage had taken place. And then it's not consistent across all different things of legality or inappropriate speech. I don't think we have a program that is actually protecting people and looking out for the kinds of conduct that are appropriate. So my concern is more that it's extremely arbitrary, and it's being run largely by the private sector and done without a legal paradigm or a policy framework by the government. So that concerns me.
So let me just follow up with that, if I could, coming at it yet from another angle, because these are obviously complex issues that Michael and I and you, Neil, are not going to sort through in 30 minutes or so. But I would say this: when somebody is in the public domain, as I mentioned earlier, I do feel that they do have a special responsibility to act responsibly. However, you have to view that as the town square in terms of their engagement. And so I would err in those circumstances to allowing more rather than less speech, meaning less restrictions than more, assuming the person is acting responsibly. On the other hand, once you're a private citizen, or as private citizens, whether it's with Twitter or any other social media, you basically have a contract right with that organization. That organization is a private entity. It's got contract relationships with users, and they do have rights to exercise the controls they want to exercise. You, as somebody who might be having their communications limited, always have the right to go to another platform, or in fact, as entrepreneurs, go out and create a new platform. So again, it's complicated, and maybe it's contextual specific, but I want to get that thought out there as well.
Absolutely. And outside of recent events, I think technology has moved, and along with tech companies have moved at such a breakneck speed. It's been hard for governments and regulators to keep up with that progress. So I'm curious, do you think there is a form of a Techlash building, or at least a move away from that moving fast and breaking things attitude in Silicon Valley, and more understanding the implications and the responsibilities of every tech creation that we put out there?
Well, I'd love to get Michael's views on this. He spends a lot of time thinking about these issues in our policy group. I would say this: there is a, as you call it, a Techlash building. In some cases, in certain regions in Europe, it may already be upon us. Certain other jurisdictions like the U.S., it might feel like a Techlash, where we've been a little more laissez-faire in terms of our approach to regulatory. But again, at the end of the day, my view is this is sort of like pendulums. Sometimes the pendulum swings out, then it swings back. Sometimes it swings back too far. It has to come back in then again. And we're in a mode right now where people are kind of scrutinizing the role of big tech. Big tech has a lot of influence and dominance in our economy. In many ways, that's been a positive. But again, I think when anything gets big too fast, you normally have these societal reactions. And as I'm going to talk about perhaps later with you, the key here is to make sure that rights are respected. So if it's data privacy rights, people have a feeling that those rights are in fact being respected and not being unduly commercialized, and that you're also, that big tech and other folks who play in the technology community are having as broad a reach as possible in terms of including society in these developments, so that there's no sense of being excluded intentionally or unintentionally, frankly.
And I would just add on to what Victor's saying, and I think the Techlash is wonderful. It's a perfect cliche that we are using now. Is it any different than in the past? I'd say yes, because the very concept that Victor and I discussed quite a bit is that these companies that were once relatively small startups and that would ask for forgiveness, not for permission. It was we're going to get to yes, and it's bold, brash leadership, and they were young and they were cool, and they didn't wear suits or ties. It was wonderful. And I'd say what happened is they grew up and they got massive. And so the concept that we can just unsubscribe from one platform and subscribe to another, or move from one place to another and we'll be at home. It's right in some circumstances, not right in others. And so we're seeing a massive antitrust movement across the board on a number of companies, and I think more to come. And the question really becomes one of, are consumers able to fastly move from one service to another, or are those services connected? And has there been consolidation that should concern us? I don't know that we have the answer to it yet. Certainly, there is some data that suggests that all of these things are intertwined, which is if you have companies getting bigger and then you have them exerting control over content, and you have the government not taking as active a role in setting some of the ground rules, then I think people begin to say, wait a second, I'm not necessarily comfortable with this. And I think we've got some tectonic plate shifting issues that have to be discussed, have to be kind of reviewed. And there's a question about whether there has been an appropriate, not that we want to overly regulate, but whether there's been an appropriate oversight of a incredibly important and growing and now kind of fundamental piece of the economy, or the global economy. And we have to answer some questions about whether it's functioning for consumers or in their detriment.
And by the way, this is no different than other points in our economic history, where with great developments, regulation and sometimes over-regulation that had to be pulled back had to catch up. Goes back to the trusts with the oil companies early on in the 1800s. You can move that forward just in terms of employee and workforce health and safety in the beginning of the next century, last century. So again, this is not something new, other than the events to which you're applying it, the developments to which you're applying it are in fact different, but the context is the same, if you want to take that long view of history.
Absolutely. And we're racing through 2021. It's hard to believe that as we record this, we're already heading straight into March. And you do have a new president now. So I've got to ask, what do you think the Biden administration means for big tech? Do you see any big changes on the horizon?
So I'll just broaden that out if I could a little, and I'll answer it from a view of technology. I mean, certainly, I think the administration is going to have less of a sense of suspicion towards technology and innovation generally. They may be more embracing just because of their constituent base as well. I mean, if you think about it, the Speaker of the House hails from the West Coast, of course, from San Francisco, which is the center of technology in many ways. Their Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, hails from the technology sector as well. And so again, I think you have just a general disposition, a favorable disposition to the scientific community writ large. And then overlaying that, you do have various initiatives that are percolating through. Put aside politics, but there is going to be more of a enhanced focus, perhaps, on clean tech and sustainability and issues of that sort in this administration. And I think there's even if you think about broadband access, I think that this administration probably will spend more time thinking about, in many ways, ironically, how to connect up the rural community, because good portions of the urban communities, although there are pockets where this does not apply yet, are fairly well connected. And so how do you, again, as I said earlier, bring everybody along on this journey so they're not feeling excluded, so they're not feeling threatened by developments in technology? And I think that's the trick for this Biden administration, if you ask me.
And that is the trick. I think that Victor's right. I also believe that this is going to be a fascinating time period, because we have an administration that's coming in that did not outline a very aggressive agenda on technology or the internet. It was a couple of issues here and there, certainly broadband deployment and kind of the gig economy, gig workers. That's an area of focus for the president and the vice president, and the what happened in California around the AB5 and whether gig workers are independent contractors or employees, and then the Proposition 24. There will be issues that impact technology that are much more legacy, kind of long-standing issues around labor and around issues that I think where the president has a stronger view. I would say we're open. I think there's a great deal of energy and effort that will be taken to develop some of these policies, because I just don't think that this is an administration that comes in with as strong a position on technology as, for example, past administrations. And so I think the previous administration was fairly hard on the internet community, and I think that largely it was based on beliefs about what the composition of those companies were in terms of their politics, and a very strong deregulatory emphasis. And the problem ultimately for technology and the internet and where the things are going is that you need to have regulation where things are unclear. And so, and we'll get to this, but I think when we're talking about autonomous vehicles, unmanned aircraft systems, all of those things demand that we have a strong government that's creating very clear pathways for the adoption of those technologies. So I would just say that I think there's a lot to be seen yet. And I think that there are very smart and capable people that are in this administration that have come from very strong backgrounds, as Victor said. But they enjoy one thing, which is they are not, with a few exceptions, I wouldn't say that they are kind of beholden to or on a path that cannot be changed. I think that we'll see open dialogue and a thoughtful discussion of these issues, and that's exciting.
And another big change this year is there seems to be a much stronger focus on climate change. And before I sat down to talk with you both today, there was Bill Gates on the TV promoting his book on climate change. A copy of Wired magazine popped through my letterbox with Bill Gates on the front, again, honing in on those same problems. So I'm curious, do you think we're going to see a big move towards green tech, sustainability, and making a difference with technology rather than just more shiny gadgets?
So it's interesting. And again, Michael thinks a lot about this from a policy perspective. So good to hear his views on this as well. So, for me, before climate change as a mantra was embraced, technologies were developing that actually would take pressures off this global phenomenon, if you will. So what do I mean by that? We've always looked for ways to enhance technology in the area of development of new energy sources, solar. I've done deals where you're enhancing the efficacy of wind turbine technology, grid management. These have been developing for the last 15, 20 years. What's happened with the phenomena of climate change, which is real in many ways, the political world has made that concept quite fraught, and I think you're going to have to figure out a way to continue the underlying development of the technologies that get to that goal. But again, there's a lot of hostility and reaction by various different constituents when you say climate change. And the goal is to sort of, how do you achieve policy goals and not create this visceral negative reaction by important segments of our community?
Very interesting response, Victor. I think you're right, and I think it's actually that is a wonderful response in the depth. I think one of the issues that I'm looking at is the next budget reconciliation in the United States, which will a mechanism where we're going to get to a simple majority passing new laws. It's likely to have an infrastructure component to it, and the big question becomes: are we fixing bridges and paving roads, or are we creating smart cities and opening the doorway to urban air mobility and electrifying our vehicles? Are we ushering in a new paradigm for mobility, for how we function in society? And I think the answer to that is unclear. I wish I could give you the answer that we're going there and that we're going to be in our air taxis and that we're going to be using drones for inspections and deliveries, and that we will be, our kids, or even when we're older, will be in automobiles that we don't own, that are being driven by the car itself. And I think that is the idea. I think the problem is that there's enough to be done on some basic infrastructure improvements that my thought is that we will not be seeing the degree of progress that we'd like, but I think we'll get there. And I think that there's a start that has to happen. And I think this is an administration that is devoted to sustainability, wants to see real change in terms of how we address issues of climate and embrace green tech. And so the short answer to your question, which is a great one, is I think there's going to be a combination of some incremental progress on sustainability and how technology impacts that. And there'll be a whole host of great new shiny objects. So everyone's going to get a little bit of what they want. And my hope is that in terms of the mobility issue, that we open up a wonderful new era of transportation infrastructure that is touched by technology.
And by the way, so here's the conundrum. I have to jump in again, which is, how do you achieve everything Michael just said, whatever balance happens to be struck by policymakers, and avoid, again, this sense of, this backlash against big tech, because again, more money you devote to, the technology and the innovation side in an infrastructure bill beyond bridges and roads and tunnels, the more it feels like something else. It feels like somebody's pushing an agenda under the guise of something else. So again, I think that's the trick at this very fraught moment in time that we find ourselves, where how do we get beyond, yet again, bridges and highways to nowhere, new bridges and highways to nowhere, let alone repairing ones that are falling down, but yet doing exactly what Michael talked about and taking us to the next century, if you will, if you can see that far down the path. That's the trick.
100%. And we are talking a lot at the moment about things like autonomous cars, smart cities, potentially COVID passports, a very contentious issue at the moment. So what legal challenges do you see in tech over the next 12 months and beyond? Is there anything that keeps you guys up at night? Because I'm sure you both see the world very differently from someone that goes, hey, that's cool, autonomous cars. Because from your point of view, you see the world very differently and the kind of problems that could bring. But is there anything that does keep you up at night?
I would say this for me, and again, there's a lot of different ways to answer this question, but I'll take it back to one of my earlier comments. The advance of technology, the development of technology as we build to the future has to bring everyone along. People can't be threatened by new developments that are coming. They can't feel that by, focusing policy and related dollars on new technologies like wind and solar, that you're going to throw them out of work in fossil fuels, right? There has to be a way to get people comfortable and get people moving along, get the dialogue going again, so they don't feel their economic wealth or economic position generally is threatened. I fully appreciate that as a kid who came from a blue collar community and family. It's not good enough to say, oh, we're going to change industries and you'll retool. It doesn't work that way. It can have devastating impact. So policymakers have to be sensitive to that as we push forward, if you will. So that's how I wanted to respond to your question initially. Michael, let's flip it back to you.
Yeah, that's why I like the question, what keeps you up at night? Because the answer is that we need another 2.5 hours for the things that keep you up at night. And the bags under my eyes would suggest that's true. But I would say that I am. It goes back to our earlier comment about the dialogue and the platforms. And I would say that the Communications Decency Act and Section 230, which provided and provides liability protections for companies, but also gives them an opportunity to make good decisions on their platforms, is under siege. It's not so much a legal challenge, although there are a number of use cases for 230 that are being litigated. I would say that it's become a du jour talking point for politicians and regulators that we must repeal or we must amend Section 230 because these platforms are running afoul of what consumers want. And then they reference sex trafficking and objectification of children, and the dialogue becomes draconian in terms of how they're approaching it. The truth is that if one were to repeal 230, the losers are smaller companies, smaller and mid-sized companies. The large companies do not lose because they've got deep pockets. They are incredibly capable of tending to their own needs. And it would actually, in some respects, it might even free them up from additional competition. So I believe that what lawmakers and regulators at times are doing is not seeing the forest for the trees, which is there are plenty of opportunities to use resources in law enforcement to address what's happening on a lot of these platforms and to ensure that the content is legal and permissible and make sure that we are good overseers of the industry, just as we do with financial services and healthcare and other areas. I just don't think we've taken that approach. And so the easy one is just to stand on the soapbox and say repeal 230. And that to me isn't the answer. It's a talking point. It's it's something that I think will not solve any of the problems because we saw in SESTA and FOSTA and what they did with human trafficking. It didn't do away with it. It just made it harder to find for law enforcement.
And finally, to end on a positive note here, what is it that excites you both about the future of technology in society and legal tech and the role that you see Dentons playing in that new era of tech?
So I know we're winding down on time. I would say this. I love big ideas. I like innovation. I like new ways of solving problems. And I love it on a global basis. And that's what Dentons is about, right? Our global teams, whether it's venture technology, the policy group, we're global in orientation. We don't really have competitors that do what we do on a global basis, on an interdisciplinary basis, as we attack problems. We talked about autonomous vehicles. You can talk about robotics. I love the fact that my people in Berlin talk to my people in Singapore, who talk to Silicon Valley, our teams in Toronto, and then, of course, back to Sao Paulo. That's what we're about. And it's amazing to me that the folks in those regions and others way beyond them, they have that. They all, in many ways, are different, but in many ways, they have the same ethos and sense of what I just described in terms of the future and the possibilities. It could be a Silicon Valley lawyer planted in Berlin, just with a different, surname and accent, but they all are thinking the same way. And I think that is one of the benefits of technology, the broad dissemination of cultures, making the world smaller, that under these fraught times, we've forgotten as a key benefit of technology development.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's right. I would say that what excites me is, and this is, born of, to some extent, a tragedy and a continuing toll on society, which is a global pandemic. But what we have seen is students doing virtual learning, and it's not ideal, but we have the capacity to learn through connectivity and through our platforms. We are seeing a rise in the attention on telehealth. We are seeing community and commerce being transacted over platforms that make life possible in a situation where we are in great peril. And I'm heartened by the fact that technology has been an ability for us to stay connected, to stay transacting, to be in a place where we are virtually learning, working, having community. All of these things are driven by technology. And yet, at the same time, when I say that, I'm also mindful that, for example, when someone recently said that the Biden administration was talking to a lot of the technology companies about how to do vaccine distribution, my thing is I also think it's important to step back and say technology is wonderful, but let's not forget that there's, for example, a network of 5,000 urgent care centers that are all interconnected and have physical location and brick and mortar locations. And so I think that sometimes we like to think about technology and put it in one box, which is it's only the technology companies that are the bright, shiny objects who are moving fast and breaking things and asking for forgiveness, not for permission. And I would just say that technology exists in so many different areas and I think the opportunity lies in the fact that we can seek solutions to problems where technology has been harnessed by industries that may not be known for it and that have networks and connectivity, but also have experience of being on the ground and knowledge on how to be a part of healthcare delivery in a way that is most appropriate for the time. So I just think it's being excited and embracing technology while also recognizing that there's not just one solution or a handful of companies, that it's pervasive to industries that have now adopted technology and are using it to address enormous challenges to society globally.
And I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground in just 30 minutes and only just scratched the surface on some of those topics that we could talk for hours on. So anyone that wants to carry that conversation on that we started today, what's the best way of doing that?
Well, for Victor, feel free to reach out to me at Dentons Venture Beyond, which is our microsite at the firm, which is really geared towards tech and our entrepreneur community. So look forward to engaging in the conversation going forward.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm Michael.Drobac at Dentons.com. I'm in our emerging technologies practice group in Washington, D.C. And these are issues where, Victor and I, whenever we get together, I always find I've learned and feel more passionate about what we do at Dentons to help push the envelope or the needle on exciting new technology challenges.
Cannot thank you enough for taking the time to sit down and talk about some of these complex issues with me today. So thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
What I loved about this conversation today is although there were three people on the podcast who I suspect had three very different political views, we were all able to sit down and have an adult conversation about some of the sensitive topics that are going on in the world right now. And it got me thinking, if it's that easy just to sit down and have a conversation about some sensitive topics going on in the world, why can't we do it online? But once again, I don't think the problem is technology. It's with us pesky humans. We blame AI bias, but it's humans that input those biases into the AI. We blame social media and algorithms, but it is us that ultimately share, comment, and spread that outrage. So a big thank you to Victor and Michael for being the voices of reason today and also taking time to share the exciting things that legal tech and other areas of technology and where we're heading in the future. But as always, I encourage you to share your opinions and insights by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find over 1,500 interviews and also links to other podcasts that I host. I do host one with Citrix and one with Netgear too, so you'll find information about them. Other than that, I'll speak with you all again bright and early tomorrow. We'll tackle another subject and how technology really does work best when it brings people together. And on that cheesy sentiment, I'm going to walk off into the sunset and just say thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.